So today I'm joined by Scott Hampshire-Jones. Scott is a co-owner and managing director of BPL Property Care Homes, who provide accommodation and support for young people aged between 16 and 18. So welcome, Scott.
Oh yeah,
Great to see you. Thanks for
definitely.
joining us today. So Scott, tell us a bit more about BPL Property Care Homes.
So I set BPL up as a therapeutic supported accommodation. Most of my career, to be honest, has been within statutory services as social work managers. And what I was often seeing is young people that I felt had the most complex needs, or had the most diverse childhood traumas. It was really difficult to find suitable accommodation for them. So often, what I was finding sitting as a social work manager in a statutory service was I would have a young person coming out of custody, and everything would be last minute for this child. And often those outcomes would be that they would be placed in emergency placements that we would deem unsuitable, and then wondered how we'd lost the child in terms of sort of recalls and high rates of non-engagement. Um, so I decided to set up a home for really those children that often people said no or society sort of rejected. Often they were misunderstood. So often, a lot of what was projected around in terms of some of the systems and um, how they were being perceived was that they were the issue in society. These children were the children that no one could move past their behaviours. And I suppose what we wanted to do within BPL is understand where those behaviours are coming from. Let's look at, what's causing this young person to self-harm or, um, be exploited within the sort of gang or county line cultures that there currently is. So we opened sort of 2 years ago as sort of we are the yes for those children, and to offer them almost a lifetime connection. I didn't want a home that often, you hit 18 and then they're moved into um, adult services or they're moved into sort of hostels. And often what I'm seeing is you've got that yo-yo effect. I can always go home to my mum, even at 42, if I get any stuck. We've got that consistent relationship. Um, and often people do. What we were seeing was these children after 18 would just fall off a cliff almost because the support systems, their social workers would disappear. If they were known to CAMS, that would disappear. So they were getting often a limited service at that 18 um, period, 18-year-old period. So I suppose what we wanted to do is offer that relationship for life approach where even now Christmas was 3 months ago, but we invited all our children back that had been with us. We still keep in contact and go out with our children and offer them that support, and that connectedness. And it's something that I've always valued as a social worker and as a social work manager. And it's something that I always felt was important in terms of having that sort of vision and values of BPL. So we opened sort of 2 years ago. Well, it was 2.5 years ago. So it was sort of during the bang hit in the COVID pandemic, which was really difficult in terms of starting up a brand new business with the restrictions and the difficulties that society and businesses were facing at that time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we'll touch on that in a second because I'd like to delve down a bit more deeper into that. But firstly, just to go back on sort of something that you said there, you saw something that you wanted to change within the system. Why did you start to do that through starting your own business rather than from changing it in the previous roles that you had as as an employee for
Yeah,
local authorities? Why did you start your own business to make that change?
I think it was the freedom of creativity. Um, Often what I was struggling with was some of the boundaries and restrictions of my role within capacities of my previous roles. So often I wasn't in control over the placement side of social work. Therefore, I couldn't, you know, that part wasn't agreed to me. So I would have a child in custody and be reliant on multiple other people to make sure that this child's transitions were effective and right for that particular child. And often what I was finding is there were system failures in that because there was, my understanding of the child could be conflicting with those from the police or from um, the resources within those areas. So often what we were finding was that these particular children, um, were almost, I suppose, outcast even within the looked after structures. So other children were getting prioritized because they would be deemed easier, or they would read an information about a child and not really see the holistic view of the child, just see the negatives of the child. And I think when you in a society that does that, it really closes down their options, and therefore, residential children's homes or supported accommodations would read and think, this is too much of a headache. I'm going to say no.
Yeah, yeah.
So I suppose I could only do so much within those restraints that I felt that I had. So it, opening the business for me offered me the creativity to explore my own visions and values and
Mhm.
what I see for children, and take supporting children on that journey with me and building a culture that I feel is inclusive. So often I used to see, children's homes sort of label children as, well, they're aggressive, or they're manipulative. And that's not one of my ethoses. I really do believe that we over-label children, which then stigmatizes them. And then you almost fall into this self-fulfilling prophecy, of, well, if you've labeled me as bad egg of the family, then what's the point of fighting against it? So I might as well become that because you've just drilled that into me for so long. So the creativity for us has always been that to have the visions and values of saying to my staff, would this be good enough for your own children? Really investing in those relationships, but also having the creativity of not having to jump through multiple hoops to buy a pair of kids, like a pair of jeans because they haven't got any, or socks because they got holes in them, or I didn't have to then go through about four different people to get that sanctioned. I could respond quickly to need. Um,
So
and with
in terms of in terms of that, you mentioned there about the creativity. So um, I'm interested to know where, because I think, well, am I right in saying, is it two homes that you've got now?
We have got to, yeah. So
Okay,
we've just grown, so we've got a second home now. But we've also grown in terms of doing a lot more, widening our offer to children that aren't just in care. So we are doing activity mentoring and support for children that are still at home,
okay.
or
So
maybe excluded.
what's the aspirations um, for your business? Where do you see it in the future? Do you see do you see it as as gradually building on homes and having more, or
Yeah.
what's the future hold for your business,
I
Scott?
would like to, I suppose, just be that monopoly of good practice. We've just won an award for Best Supported Accommodation
Congrats.
for 2023, which is fantastic to get that and that recognition within 2 years. I've just been put forward for a social work award from East Sussex County Council. So my view is really to really push our practice model and really to give children um, that safe place of understanding and unconditional acceptance.
Mhm.
That's not to excuse behaviors. We dress behaviors through techniques of CBT and trauma-informed practices, but that unconditional acceptance and love, I think, is very important. So I would want that sort of message to go across to all other providers where possible and to help support and influence that. I would like to obviously grow in terms of opening more homes to offer more spaces to children because we are restricted in terms of that limitation at the moment. But we are where we should be at this point, I believe. The growth within 2 years, I think, is an achievement for us because it's a hard industry um, to stay current in,
Yeah,
and relevant for children.
and I was going to ask that because how do you balance providing such an important service for young people, with creating a sustainable and profitable business that can grow to reach more young people.
Yeah.
How do you balance those things?
So initially, I kind of looked and done freedom of information requests to all local councils to see what average costs were for other providers, and then I'd done a sort of Venn diagram and costs and benefits analysis on where do they sit in the market for that offer compared to comparatively of what I feel children deserve and how best can I meet that need. So, for example, we build costs in order to be more flexible to children. So, if we have a child's interest, what we often want to do is build that strength. So we included the costs of if a young person loves music studios and is into, I don't know, singing or playing instruments or recording their own music. And we were able to meet that need internally rather than relying on other people. So we wanted to become a bit of a hub for children that we could respond to. We've just opened our own MMA gym where a lot of our children, are very keen to grade and exercise for all multiple different reasons.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, it was just about seeing where we sat within the market, but doing a comparative study on where where do we sit in terms of that offer and where would we like to be. Um, I feel we are cost effective of what we offer versus others. So we've kind of pitched ourselves equivalent into the area, but I believe we offer more. So I don't overcharge in that respect of um, that child's needs. So I see it as a sustainable business, but I suppose my moralistic view is needs to be a safe space for a home.
So it
Um,
sounds as though what if I've understood this correctly is that what you've done there is identified, make sure you've identified the needs of the children, and
yeah,
making sure that the the investment is made specifically on their needs, so you get a better,
exactly.
it's more focused, rather
Yeah,
than just spending sort of cash on things that aren't needed by those young children.
of course. Yeah,
You're making sure that any penny you spend is invested in the needs of the children, and
yeah.
therefore a great investment. Okay, no, that
And
sounds
also,
good. Sounds
yeah,
great.
so it becomes a lot more focused, but also I think what we try to do is challenge back where we feel there may be money wasted. So, in terms of ethical costings, because the majority of our funding does come from the local authority, which obviously comes from taxpayers, where there may be from previous homes um, a view of a child. So, for example, if a child was on a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio, because that's what their previous provider um, have dictated, and that's their view, and that I'm not judging that. What we do is I suppose we would assess the child and feel actually if you've had a 4 to 1, we don't believe that's effective. We think that's quite triggering for children. I mean, I wouldn't know how I would. Well, I know how I would feel walking down the street with 4 people following me. I'd be upset and annoyed. um, so I think we therefore didn't cost at the 4, and we would ethically say actually the needs of the child is the paramount, and we will work around that.
Okay, no, I get
Um,
that. So, as you mentioned earlier, Scott, before you started your business, you worked at a number of local authorities in the social work arena. Um, what what have you found most challenging about moving from being an employee to being an employer and running a business?
I suppose it's the 24 hours aspect of the work. As a social work manager, you do a lot of hours. There's almost a safety of you're in your office and it's separate. And actually, the risk does sit with me as a professional, and I would always say that in terms of the accountability of being a manager. But there's a distance because there's a corporateness in terms of actually the buck doesn't just stop with me there. It's ever ending with directors, exec directors, etc., local MPs. What I've find, I suppose, with the difficulties that it's had is obviously it's more, it doesn't stop. So, it's 7 days a week. I'm on call mostly because of the nature of my work. So I could get two calls at 2, 3 in the morning. The worry for children is more exacerbated because my passion and it's my baby in terms of my vision, my values. So the motivation is more enhanced because I'm more passionate because I have the freedom of creativity and the freedom to be able to make positive change the way I feel it should be done, rather than layers and layers of what could often be bureaucracy.
Yeah,
Um, to get, as I said, just to get a sign off of a coat for a child, you're jumping through hoops where I can think actually there's a need there. Why, if it was my child that needed a coat, why would I not go and get the child a coat?
yeah,
And often what you're seeing is, children coming, it's sad, moving from provider to provider. They've often lived transient lifestyles from family to other providers. We've seen children come to us in black bags with, holes in their shoes. And I just
yeah,
think, you know, it's that positive change that I can react quite quickly
yeah.
to. So
So
I didn't know if I answered the question there, but the difficulties, that's switching off is difficult.
yeah,
Um, and that ownership, and even so, I've been passionate about supporting vicarious traumas of my all staff, even in the statutory sector. We've become more of a family because we've got that agreed vision. It's a smaller unit. I'm not having to, my previous job that I just left December, I had sort of over 100, 200 staff, where we were a cohort of about 20.
mhm,
Um, and they're all just impassioned as well. So to see that growth really pushes me on to see someone actually bite onto think, actually, I really agree with that. I've worked this industry all my life, but you've just put that light bulb moment on for me. Really sort of passionate, but it's the, yes, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a
yeah.
year.
I think
It's tiring.
that's the thing, isn't it? With being a business owner, and that's what I often find with a lot of my clients as well is that you know there's a number of reasons why people start their own business, and that's why I was interested in yours. But quite often, it's actually for freedom and flexibility to do what you want when you want to do it, and that sort of thing. But actually, certainly at the beginning of starting out a business, you probably got less freedom and flexibility because of the amount of things
Oh
that
gosh.
you have to do and the ownership of everything, and as you say, it's 24/7. So yeah, it can be really challenging. So you mentioned earlier, Scott, about the challenges that you faced with during during COVID. What what was the biggest impact of COVID on your sort of business and the service that you provide to young children?
Um, I think we saw a real, uh, over the whole COVID period, a real decline in people wanting to work or able to work. I shouldn't say wanting to,
Yeah,
I suppose feeling able to work. And in an industry where, you know, you had no choice to go in, you couldn't say, like most social workers in the world, you know, sat at home and isolated and worked from home and the whole world shifted and changed. You couldn't do that when you're running a home. And it was that sort of staff resilience around emotional well-being when you've got young people not adhering to COVID rules and you're having to sort of support them, worry about it was all unknown territory. So they're making unsafe decisions and risky decisions, but also putting other people at it by coming back by doing what they were doing. And staff almost not having a choice to some extent because the nature of the business, you either had to do it or, there wasn't work there for you because, I couldn't send people home to say, right, work at home for the day because that wasn't the nature of what we do.
yeah,
And then what we were noticing is our sufficiency was becoming very difficult because we were needed staff, especially at points of growth. And what we were seeing is where we had really positive recruitment drives previously, we were seeing less and less and less, despite that we paid slightly more than equivalents. And in care, we pay, we do pay, believe quite well for what that does. But I was seeing increased stress within the system for staff, but also um, workforce efficiency was very difficult
Yeah, yeah,
to maintain that. And often, what happens when you get COVID, you know, because you have to then isolate people and having the right workforce. So I had to move into the home with a set amount of people, and let everyone else stay at home, which put financial pressures on them, um, just to keep people safe.
yeah.
And actually, when people did get COVID,
It's been a real challenge for a number of sort of businesses, uh, and it's great to have seen a number of business come through it like yourselves, and at those really difficult times. And what what would you say your biggest learning since you've been in business is?
um, for me, it was about my leadership style,
Mhm.
um, and the level of communication. So I moved towards a systemic flat structure as I really wanted to empower people to share their experiences of their backgrounds, and invest in people so that they invested in myself. So since opening, we've got a high proportion of people who have remained. And I think that says a lot in terms of really difficult time. We had some really challenging children in terms of, developmental traumas that was aggression to staff, assaults, etc. On top of being in COVID and a new business, there was all those facets to sort of manage. But I think because we focused on that systemic flat structure of I want to see you, I want to hear you, tell me your thoughts of what's working, what's not working, how can we lead together from the bottom, rather than being that sort of dictatorial approach, which often happens in other structures of hierarchy. I was very much about that development of side. I want to hear yours. How does that fit in with what we're doing? And that's not to take a responsibility away because the overall decision was mine, but it was giving the voice to people. Um, and that breeded a culture, I suppose, of learning and commitment, and wanting to do better for children. Um, so I suppose that leadership style really worked for me, and it's something that I am very aware of in sort of interactions.
Yeah, I
And
think there's been a real shift from the historic way of leadership, which was very command and control.
yeah,
That's how it's been defined. How people led
yeah,
historically, and actually the new way of leading is trust and inspire.
that's
Uh,
it.
so
Yeah,
what do you put in place to create trust and inspire? It sounds as though that's something that you've learned and you've put in practice in your business. So, and look, finally, I always like to finish on this question. What's the best advice you would give an 18-year-old you, Scott?
oh God. I think it was just keep going. Like I constantly knew and set targets of where I wanted to be by certain ages. So I wanted to be a counselor at the age of sort of remember even at, like, when I was sort of when everyone else wanted to be pop stars or this, that, and the other. I wanted to help people, and so counseling and social work was always in my thing. So I always gave myself like clear direction and goals of right when I was in a team, I wanted to be a manager by this age. I want to be a head of service by this age. I want to be, I was always wanted, as I said, I wanted to be a counselor, but because I was always told about one, didn't have the academic ability, it was always what I was told. So I fought against those scripts that were forced on me. Um, but also I think I was told financially it's better to go to become a social worker. Um, so it's always setting your goals. So going back to that, I am now doing my psychotherapy course, and I think I've gone back to where I've achieved what I've wanted to achieve. I'm achieving what I want to achieve, but don't stop because I think you can get stagnant. And I think for me, it's about always keeping current, always keeping reflective, and always learn. So I think I would go back just to say, just keep setting your goals and um, keep learning.
That's some fantastic advice that I absolutely agree with there, Scott. Yeah, sort of, yeah, have goals. The path to those goals may not always be straightforward, but you've got to keep that on those goals and continually learn. I like that as well. So Scott, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today and sharing more about your business and your journey. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Simon.